Part of maintaining your brake system is flushing the brake fluid out every 2 years is what's recommended by most manufacturers. So this is one of the shop cars here at Monte Vista, and when we popped the hood to do our flush on this one, we noticed that the master cylinder was empty. So the first thing we made sure we do is get the right fluid for the car. This is .4 brake fluid. If you take a look at the cap that came off the master cylinder, there's always some writing on there, and it tells you what type of fluid exactly to put in here. This particular one says .3. .3 and .4 are the same chemical, they just have a different boiling point. And so .4 is actually a little bit higher boiling point. It's a little bit better chemical, so we like to use that over here.
In this animation, we have the entire brake system of a car. We're going to be showing you how to flush the system in the car to get rid of the old fluid. Okay, so you have your brake pedal that goes into a brake booster, and then that pushes a piston in what we call a master cylinder with the reservoir that holds all the extra fluid in this reservoir with the yellow cap. When you step on the brake pedal, that sends the fluid to each of the four wheels. It does show a combination valve or a proportioning valve here. We'll get into that more specifically later. But it does go to the four wheels. This fluid over time accumulates moisture and it breaks down. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what happens when you get the fluid absorbing moisture over time. Okay, so over time, especially if you're a really humid area, your moisture content increases in your fluid, which lowers your boiling point. And so by lowering the boiling point, then that allows the fluid to boil, and then it creates air bubbles. And you're going to be hearing us talk a lot about air bubbles. When air bubbles happen, you end up getting a sinking brake pedal or a fading brake pedal. So I'm going to apply the pedal now, and you'll see it will actually sink and not apply your brakes as it should. Okay, so you will find that the vehicle is very hard to stop, and it's really important we change that fluid to prevent this kind of a brake fade situation, which could be very dangerous. The lines also rust internally, and they corrode, and they eventually crack, and they break. So we need to change our brake fluid to prevent it from becoming acidic and eating away our brake lines from the inside out. So those are two reasons that we should change our brake fluid, which is to prevent the acidic condition, which eats our lines and creates rust, and also to remove the moisture of the fluid that lowers our boiling point as we absorb the moisture just from the air around us. Something of note, whenever you store new brake fluid, if you leave the cap off, the standard rule is that you need to throw it away after a week, because if you leave the cap off, then it's absorbing the moisture as well. So your new fluid can become bad fluid just by leaving your cap off.
To flush a brake system, you want to use some specialty wrenches. The bleeder valves by each wheel are made out of pretty soft material. You want to make sure you use the proper wrench on there so you don't round anything off. So to get started here, we filled up the system, and if you come take a look over on the side here, there's an indication on the side of the master cylinder for the maximum fluid level and minimum fluid level. During the bleeding process, we want to try to keep the fluid from going down too low. I like to keep it above the minimum level. If you let it go down too far, you'll end up sucking air into the system, and then you end up having to start from scratch all over again. So there's several different bleeding methods. One is gravity bleeding, one is vacuum bleeding, another is called pressure bleeding. First method, simplest one, is called gravity bleeding. We're just going to open up the bleeder valves, make sure the master cylinder is full, and let nature or gravity do its work. Here we go. So I already got the right size tool. I'm just going to crack these open about a full turn. Don't take them out. You just need to open them. go about a full turn of her. Yeah, right there's about a full turn. And one more. And then we just gotta wait. This process, you gotta be pretty patient because it does take time for gravity to do its thing. I already see some fluid coming out, and I'm gonna head and close that one up.
And we get it. Okay.
Now I'm just gonna snug this down because we're probably gonna open it back up and make sure we got all the air out. And go to the next one and see which other ones are starting to drip. This one's still dry. You know, you gotta figure the front's gonna drip first because it's the closest. And maybe I'll open this one up a little more just to make sure. Okay, so we have one of the rear ones is bled out, and there's a little bit of puddle of brake fluid on there. Brake fluid dissolves with water. It's water soluble, so when we're done with the job, we're just gonna flush it all down with water and neutralize all the brake fluid on the ground. Again, when you go to tighten this, you just wanna snug it. So like Mr. Fleming always says, one pinky on the wrench, you know, one pinky is plenty tight. If you grab it with your full fist and try to twist it, you're gonna end up stripping or rounding off those bleeder valves. That side's still dry. I guess those two must be connected, huh?
So we're looking at the picture over to the right over here, and this is a traditional type of a brake system. It's like what they used to use all the way up until about the mid 90s. And what it means is that traditional is both the front brakes are connected by one line going to your master cylinder, and the rear brakes are connected together with one line going to the master cylinder. So if you were to bleed this system, you would bleed the right rear first, then the left rear, then the right front, then the left front. That would be your brake bleeding sequence for a front rear hydraulic split, or I just call it a traditional split. Now, if we go to what we have right now in the video, we have a diagonal split system, or I call it a cross diagonal system. So again, you have your master cylinder right here. All the wheels are connected to the master cylinder, but if you look at the green, the left front wheel is connected to the right front wheel. The right front wheel is connected to the left front wheel. They changed to this cross diagonal system or diagonally split system because if one of the system fails, you're going to have one front brake and one rear brake on opposite sides if half the system fails. Versus on the other system, you would either have all the front brakes or all the rear brakes if half the system fails. So the manufacturers about the mid 90s split to this cross diagonal system for safety reasons in case of in an event you lose half the brake system.
Older brake systems used to be split longitudinally, and what that means is we have a dual master cylinder. It has two separate reservoirs, one for the front, one for the rear brakes, and if there's ever a failure in the system, you still have half the system that works. Either the front would work if you had a leak, or the rears would still work for safety. Modern cars do it a little differently. They do it diagonally, and so in this case, the driver's side rear is connected to the passenger side front, and the driver's side front is connected to the passenger side rear. And this way, if you have a leak in the system, you have some front brake and you have some rear brake, some on both sides, you know, on either side of the car, and it makes it a little bit safer in an emergency type of stop. So I know that this one is cross diagonal because the fluid back here is already leaking out, and same thing with the front right wheel is leaking out. Those two are connected. So we've already bled that part of the system, and we're still waiting for the other part of the system to bleed out. So we've been waiting a while here for the other diagonal part of the system to bleed out, and we're not getting any fluid out of it. And this is often the case with a gravity bleed. It's not the best way to bleed brakes. It is a way, but a better way is probably a vacuum method. So we're gonna try that next. I'm gonna grab this vacuum tank over here. This same vacuum tank that we use to flush out our power steering system, we're also going to use that to help us bleed our brake system. Really important with brake systems that you don't get cross contamination of the fluid. And as I mentioned, we use this to drain our flush out our power steering system, and now we're going to use it on the brake system, so it's a good idea to clean it out before you go over to the next fluid. This top easily unscrews, and then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this brake fluid this power steering fluid that's in here. So we can't just dump the chemical anywhere. We have to follow the same EPA rules that any other shop follows, even though we're a high school. So we have this certified tank here. It holds, I think, 500 gallons of used oil, and that's where I'm going to dump the old power steering fluid. Okay, so we got rid of the old oil that was in here, and then I'm going to use this solvent just to clean this out real quick. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I want to get a decent job done on getting that cleaned out, and then we'll clean all this out. And I'll even run a little bit of the fluid through the hose to get that washed out too. You guys can see it coming out into the top of the canister. So I'm going to connect this vacuum bleeder. When you hook this to shop air and you flip this lever forward, as air rushes through here, it creates suction in the tank. This hose is attached to the tank, and that's how we're going to suck the fluid out. With the cross-diagonal system, we want to make sure that we start at the rear first, because that's the longest line. The bleeder valve is already open. If I just snap that on there, start to get some fluid out of here. And there we go, we're already starting to get fluid out. Excellent. It still works really well. Okay, so I want to go ahead and close the bleeder valve before I take that line off there. Then I can shut the vacuum system off, and I can remove this from here without any air rushing back into the system. So it looks like we got this one bled out. Let's go over to the front. So I'm sucking fluid out through each wheel. One of the things you want to make sure is that the level in the master cylinder doesn't go low enough to suck air in there. And so before I do this next wheel, I'm going to go ahead and top that system off. End of that diagonal system. Go ahead and make sure that this is open a little. Turn on our vacuum, and hopefully we'll see fluid pretty quickly here. Before I remove this, I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up. And just using one little finger to snug it down, and then we can pull this off. When you're using the vacuum bleeder, you're going to make sure you do all four wheels. You're going to do the two rears first, then the two fronts. And that should take care of it. Sometimes you have to go around more than one time to get all the air out, but this system works really good. There is one other system that we can use to bleed the air out of brakes, and that is called a power bleeder, or pressure bleeding. Okay, this is our pressure bleeder tank, and this uses brake fluid inside with the shop air to pressurize the system. And so before you go to use this, you have to make sure that the tank is pressurized. It should be at about 30 psi. I don't like to put it any higher than that. All you do is take an air chuck, and you can connect it down below here, and you can put some air into that thing and watch the gauge. And right there is where I want it to start out with. Okay, now we're all charged up and ready to go. If you ever need to fill it with brake fluid, there's a little ring collar here that you disconnect. You rotate this, you can pull the seal out, and then you just fill brake fluid into the top of here. Okay, we're all filled up, charged with air pressure. You got to determine which is the right adapter to use for your particular master cylinder. This kit comes with many different tops for the different master cylinders that you'll find under the hood of many different cars, and this is the particular one that's going to work for this car. Okay, so the first thing you got to do is install this adapter, and so this part goes in first, I believe, and then this collar should tighten down on there for us. It looks like we got it nice and snug. There's a little rubber expansion plug underneath here that I want to tighten up, and hopefully we won't have any leaks once this is all set to go. Just snug it good by hand. Don't need any kind of pliers or tool on there. hose hooks up just like any of the shop air fittings. It's very similar. And the first thing I want to do is check and see if I have any leaks. So I'm going to go open the valve on here slowly. I'm going to watch that cap over there and make sure I'm not spraying brake fluid underneath the hood of the car. And it's open, and I'm not seeing any leaks, so it looks like I installed that lid properly. Because this is a cross diagonal, we're going to do the left rear, right front, then right rear, left front in that sequence. So let's start out back here. I'm going to crack this open, and I should see some fluid squirting out. Now what I'm looking for is the stream coming out. If there are breaks in the stream, that's air. If it's a solid stream, no air. I'm seeing a solid stream coming out of there. No breaks at all. So I think we got all the air out of this one. All right. Did the left rear, now we're on the right front. Again, crack this open, and you're looking for a break in the stream, and I see a solid stream coming out of there. And so I'm just gonna snug this down, and now we're gonna go to the rear on this side. This particular wheel we had a really hard time getting any fluid out of with the gravity method and with the vacuum method. Let's see if the pressure method works any better. So here I'm going to crack it open and again and look for air coming out. I saw a little plop of air in the beginning, but we are getting a good stream of fluid out, and I'm not seeing it. Oh, there was a little blurp. A little air bubble popped out of there, so it's a good thing we're bleeding this side. There goes a couple more. Perfect. See, I get so excited. That's an indication of air coming out right there, you guys. We can't have any air in the system because air compresses, and so when you step on the brake, you're going to get a spongy effect inside the system where you just have air compressing instead of your brakes actually applying. So we got to get all the air out. Okay, this is the last one we got to do, and we'll see if any air comes out of this one. And we're not getting anything out of this one. Why not? Oh, there it goes. So we might have had a little bit of air in that one. And it looks like no more. Oh, one little bubble. Yeah, that looks solid. I don't see any more air bubbles coming out of there, so I'm going to tighten this down. Remember, just snug it. So when you're done bleeding all four wheels with the pressure bleeder, you want to make sure you shut the pressure valve off so you don't get blasted with brake fluid everywhere. Snug that down. And then we can go ahead up to the master cylinder, and I like to use a couple rags around the connection. I don't like to spill brake fluid anywhere on anybody's car, so I cover that with some rags and catch any fluid that might come out. And then the same thing when I take this lid off, I just like to keep the rags here in case any extra fluid spills. Perfect. I never consider myself finished until I make sure the fluid level is correct in the master cylinder, and we do need to add a tiny bit in here to bring it up to the maximum level. Again, make sure you don't drip any brake fluid on anybody's paint on their car. Brake fluid eats paint on cars. You also got to keep your hands off the paint if you have brake fluid on your hands. So the last method that we're going to show you today is also a type of pressure bleeding, but it's called manual pressure bleeding. And this method requires that you use a friend, a lab partner, or somebody who has to hold the brake pedal down while you're doing the bleeding. So the way that we do this, Mr. Fleming's helping me today. He's my lab partner. What I'm going to ask him to do is to pump the brake pedal 5 times and hold his foot on the pedal to create pressure. And then I'm going to go around to each wheel and I'm going to bleed off any potential air that's inside there. Okay, Mr. Fleming, could you go ahead and pump that 5 times and hold it for me?
Felt a little spongy at first, so we might still have air in there.
Okay, when you're doing this method, the person that's doing the actual bleeding with the wrench is in charge. So Mr. Fleming is just going to do whatever I asked him to, and right now I asked him to hold the pressure on the pedal, and I'm going to go down by the wheel, and I'm going to do the bleeding on here. And so again, I'm going to just get my wrench on there, crack it open until I see some fluid squirt out, and you could really see a nice stream come out with no breaks in it, and that would indicate that there's no air. Now if you're not sure, you can always do it again. And so Before Mr. Fleming lifts his foot off the pedal, I have to close this valve, because when he lifts his foot off, it'll suck air back in here. So now that I have it closed, I can ask him to pump it again. Could you pump it again 5 times and then hold it? And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to crack it open again, and I'm going to look at that stream to see if it's solid. Oh, really nice solid stream. I'm going to snug that one, and this one's done for sure. Okay, could you release the pedal, please? Okay, here I am at the right front now. And what I'm going to do is the same process. I'm going to ask Mr. Fleming, could you please pump the pedal 5 times and hold it? He's going to tell me when he's holding it. And I'm going to crack this open and look for air. Okay, that looked really good. I did not see any air come out. That one's done. Pump it 5 more times, please. Okay, here I am on the passenger side rear. He just told me that he's holding the pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and check this one. Oh, nice stream. I want to make sure there's no air in here. I'm going to have him do it a second time. Could you pump it at 5 more times and let me know when you're holding?
Down.
Okay, he's holding it, and no breaks at all in the stream. We definitely got all the air out. Okay, you could release it. Okay, I'm on the last one, the driver's side front. Could you go ahead and please pump the pedal 5 times and hold it?
Down.
And again, I'm just going to break this open. Oh, we got a little bit of air out of there, so I'm going to go ahead and ask him to do it again. Could you please pump it again? And let me know when you're holding.
Down.
I'm going to crack it open. Oh, nice stream. Make sure you snug it before you tell him to lift the pedal. Okay, you can go ahead and take your foot off the pedal. We're all done.
Pedal feels great, and it was spongy at first, so
No more sponginess?
no more sponginess.
Okay, so that's how you should feel, a nice, tight, hard, firm pedal. Okay, remember, you're never done until you check the fluid level on the master cylinder, and it does need a little bit in there to bring it up to the max level. And right there is perfect. You guys notice I'm really careful not to drip any brake fluid on the paint of the vehicle. Even when I pull the funnel out, I use a rag to catch that and make sure you secure the top back on. We're all done.
So when we walked up to this Subaru, it's a shop car, never leaves the shop, but students make mistakes, and we found that the master cylinder was completely empty. We didn't record that when we started, but this was completely empty, and the brake lines had a lot of air in it. That's why it was hard for us to get the air out through the different processes. So it's important to understand the system. So it's a cross-diagonal system. But not only that, the 2 brake lines that come out of my master cylinder right here. So here's my 2 brake lines. One's down here, one's right here. They come up and they go over and they come to what we call a hydraulic control unit for your ABS system. So the 2 lines from the master cylinder come in right here, and then it goes to each wheel out of these 4 lines. So 1 for each wheel. The reason why it's so hard to get the air out of the system is we're actually trying to get the air out of the hydraulic control unit for the ABS system as well. So some cars require you to use a scanner and activate the ABS solenoids in addition to what Mr. Lear and I just showed you. So the reason why this car was hard to get the air out and why we didn't get all the air out in the first 2 methods is because we had to get the fluid from the master cylinder to the hydraulic control unit, and then from the hydraulic control unit to each wheel. So one of the things we ask our students to do is locate the hydraulic control unit, or just verify if it has one, because that makes you understand the system a lot better. So after you're done with working with brake fluid, it's always a good idea to just rinse it off. Make sure you don't get it inside your master cylinder. So I have the lid up here. You think you got on the fender, just rinse it. Don't wipe it with a rag, because that will actually hurt your paint. Just rinse it. The fluid's hydroscopic, so it actually you can see it turn a little milky. Hydroscopic means that it absorbs water. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brakes off and rinse off the fluid that drained on each wheel. Okay. And that's the procedure that I expect after we're done, is just go ahead and rinse the brakes off with some water.